interesting. And so this is obviously, we could explore this topic in a lot more depth. We don't have the time here, but there is a paper that you've published, and if you're interested in the paper, we'll make the link available to the organizers, and or you can email us, and we'll send it to you. So with that, so thank you for that. I'd like to give our other panelists an opportunity to respond to kind of this macro public policy issue from the ground up perspective. How do you guys see public policy affecting what you do, and what recommendations do you have? So maybe I'll start with Gustavo, Cesar, and finish with Matt.
Can you all hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very convenient question, because we have just published a white paper about how to build innovation and startup ecosystems, how to foster them. And we have identified 5 elements, being regulatory environment, the last one that we address, because they'll have, regulatory environment has implications in all of the other 4, which are talent, culture, density, and capital. So if you think about talent specifically, you have to foster a culture of migratory permissions that allow talent, local talent, to get connected and start working with international talent that can bring knowledge to your community. So the governments are facilitators. They should become facilitators for this specific aspect. So imagine that you have, so there are several countries, for example, in Argentina or Chile, where you actually now, in Latin America, are allowed to bring talent. You have startup visas that allow entrepreneurs from abroad to come to the country and start working with other entrepreneurs, and kind of start building those connections, building those knowledges that at some point will eventually lean towards a local development, a further local development. If you think about the second aspect, culture, I think that's kind of the most, well, like where the government would be less introduced or involved. But in a way, if government promotes the cultural aspects of, for example, failure, equality, like gender equality, developing specific needs for communities, vulnerable communities, etc., by giving visibility and exposure to these aspects, governments may allow the local ecosystems to build up on top of that. Failure, Cesar mentioned that. Failure is one of the most needed aspects of building a community, of building a successful company. You don't become a successful entrepreneur in your first job. There are very little success stories that have come from the very first try. You as an entrepreneur have to learn, and you have to build that learning curve during time by failing. And if we as community, and if governments and cultural mindsets do not allow failure as part of this, then you cannot develop what eventually will become a success. So we need to see failure as a process to eventually become successful. The third aspect is density. And for density, you have to allow and facilitate spaces that embrace innovation, such as clusters, such as hubs, such as universities, making intellectual exchange between large corporations and academia, so that you can eventually develop programs that maybe internships or maybe joint ventures between academia and large corporations in order to develop this. And how you foster, how do you promote that from a policy level? Well, by bringing incentives to the creation of these spaces, by offering opportunities to the private sector to actually build those ecosystems, those places, those spaces. Fourth, you have capital. So for the capital one, how do you incentivize investors to actually invest in local communities, in local startups. Cesar will be for sure someone that can go abroad on that specific topic. But think about it this way: tax exemptions, tax incentives. For example, in the United Kingdom, there is this law that allows investors to redeem up to 50%, to reduce up to 50% of the tax, of their taxes when you invest up to £100,000 in early stage companies. So how can you leverage on that? How can you promote the creation of companies and and shutting down a company with government policies? So imagine that you have the possibility to open a company with tax incentives for an entrepreneur, but also for investors, and also for like the value chain that all these startups are related to. But also when you fail, right? When you have this failure story, and you have to shut down a company, you also have to provide like an easy way to kind of embrace that shutting down, that company shutting down, bankruptcy, etc. Right? So in a way, government has a very important role in building innovation and startup ecosystems. But it's not their role to become the protagonists of these communities or these ecosystems. The role needs to be facilitating all of these aspects so that the whole ecosystem can coexist in itself. So that's kind of the way that we envision a government role, by becoming a facilitator rather than someone that wants to lead how to build a community.
Interesting. Cesar, you had a
I
comment?
disagree with Gus.
All right, we have a
And
disagreement.
at
That's
risk of losing a few friends, governments do not need to support entrepreneurship. Or said another way, entrepreneurs do not need government support. Entrepreneurship is out there, and it's happening, and actually happens in the wild, and it has to be that way. Some will start companies and will die. They will eventually join others. And as we look at the bigger picture, the best entrepreneurs and the best companies succeed and bring new products and solutions to the market. That's how it works, how it always works. What governments can do, and I guess should be doing, is provide a environment where it is allowed to create value, to fail, and to create that value or try to create that value again. And do it over and over. Some countries are so afraid of fraud and tax evasion and whatnot, that they created all these rules that prevent innovation from happening. Governments have to loosen up and understand that it's their role of entrepreneurs to bring solutions to their countries. And the best thing that they can do is let them do it. Mexico, and I'll use that example because I've lived it first person, has lived during the last few years through a revival of entrepreneurship. And that didn't start with government policy. That started with individuals getting together, hacking on projects, taking them to the market, creating communities, sharing knowledge, letting the word out, teaching others. That's what's happened. That's why Mexico has the largest number of startup weekends in the world, just behind the US. That's why we have invested in more companies than any other country in the world, just behind the US here in Mexico, because that's happening right now in many cities. And it's not the government who's creating that, it's the entrepreneurs. But sometimes the government in Mexico doesn't get credit for something very powerful that they started doing probably 25, maybe 30 years ago, that was opening up the economy. Mexico was very traditional, was very public sector oriented, and very monopolistic. And throughout several reforms and policies, we became one of the most open countries. We have more trade agreements than almost anybody else. We have now an open telecommunication market, and now an open energy market, and 20 years ago an open banking system. So the country is becoming very modern, not because the government came up with solutions, but because the government led the private sector come up with solutions and compete against each other. That's what we did very well. Now, it takes decades to develop an economy. We cannot expect results to happen even a couple decades after the policy started being implemented. But what we can expect is that in 20 or 30 years, the entrepreneurs that grew in that system, myself included, I never had a problem creating a new company or setting up a bank account or setting up shop, exporting goods or services. That generation will become very powerful as it starts like advancing, failing, and eventually succeeding at creating these companies. So we need to open up, we need patience, and we need to believe in those people that are willing to take the risks.
Right, and I know Gustavo is ready to jump in there. I'm just going to take the
He's trying to get government funding.
I'm going to take the moderator's cue. I'm looking at time, and I'm just going to say you probably don't disagree that government shouldn't subsidize entrepreneurs.
True fact.
Right on? Okay. And with that, actually, I know this is a very interesting topic. I want to give the word to Mac, and then we're going to go into the role that large companies play with entrepreneurs, and we'll start with that question. So Mac, give us a couple of your thoughts of public policy.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to be brief. Here, can you hear me? Yes. Well, I kind of agree with you both. No, basically I see government trying to join the club of entrepreneurship, but I do believe government it's in a better position to lead innovation. I think the relationship with government and academia is really important, and it's happening. We have Jalisco as an example. The secretariat here is pull people from academia and from entrepreneurial communities, and it's creating policies that drive innovation specifically. While entrepreneurship is something government, it's easy to show off entrepreneurship than it is to show innovation, because innovation takes a lot of time, and it's gonna have a lot of failures, and it's probably not gonna be something that everybody can see. So I do believe there's a big challenge for policymakers in understanding that innovation and entrepreneurships are probably not something they can lead, and it's not something that can be done in 6 years or short term. Especially developing countries, I see them as a government being having a problem because they tend to think short term, like 6 years elections, 6 years elections, and policy sometimes adapts to that because they have to show off what they have done. So the challenge for policymakers, to sum it up, is try to establish in these developing countries a standardized system where innovation can foster throughout longer than election cycles. I believe Obama has tried to do it, but it's going to be easy for it to be taken down given the circumstances of actual politics.
Thank you. So we could continue on this topic for another 2 hours, but I do want to address, I think, an important question from the audience, given our audience, and that's the role of large companies. The role, how can they participate? How can they benefit? And then turn the question around as well. How do entrepreneurs interact with large companies? How do they work together or compete, however it may be? And so maybe I'd like to start with César and then come back to Leo about that, and then we'll go down the line. So César, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, first, big companies are important. We cannot ignore that. And they bring two things. One, they bring liquidity to the market. They are the ones that acquire innovation when it happens at scale. And second thing that they do is that they have scale so they can provide growth for other companies. I'll focus on the second one for a bit. I challenge anyone in the audience to build a company and get to scale without partnering with a larger company. It's really hard. It's almost a myth. If we think PayPal did not grow by itself, it grew on top of eBay. Airbnb did not grow by itself, it grew on top of Craigslist. And several other companies partner or use other platforms to get to those customers faster. Now, this is happening all the time, and the problem is that fantasizing about the power of the entrepreneur as this champion of innovation, we sometimes forget that the best champions in innovation know how to use the resources around them to actually solve problems for their market. So they do have a role, and the smartest companies not only understand it, but are acting upon it. I'll give you a couple examples. One comes from Google. They realized that most of their best and most talented engineers were leaving Google to start new companies, right? Why would you work for a fixed salary and some tiny equity if you can actually build something that can potentially be worth hundreds of millions or billions? So what they did is say, fine, go outside, but we will create a venture arm called Google Ventures. So if you have something worth investing, you have a kind of a first pass, and we can assess your business, invest in it, and again, have some upside if you're actually able to bring that to market. So that's one way of partnering. Another way of partnering is by providing tools that others can use to increase the value of your platform. Facebook did this really well back in the day. They basically provided free authentication and free user management so others could build on top of that. That was a big pain for every single developer in the world to basically create this sign in, log in, log out screens and basically keep track of all those users in the system. And Facebook said, well, you know what, I already have that user, so why don't you use my tool to do it? That allowed a lot of businesses to grow faster using also the data of Facebook, and it went back into Facebook and created probably the largest data set about people in the world that is probably now Facebook's most valuable asset. So this is how you can do that. And also, it's very important for companies to understand that innovation is mostly happening outside their walls, and they should be okay with that. If I had to pick between, if I was the CEO of a big company and I had to pick between putting more budget into my research and development group or putting more budget into my mergers and acquisition group, I would choose the latter. Because most of the innovation will not happen within the walls because my employees may have the wrong incentives to innovate. They know that they are comfortable in their positions as it is. So why would they disrupt their own jobs? And on the other hand, there are people outside that are operating without that rule set, without those restrictions, and definitely with a more risk-taking attitude. So this is a lesson for companies, and I believe we're seeing steps in the right direction, and the world will become much more exciting.
Leo, what about a big company perspective? What do you think of what César just said?
Yeah, I think a big company needs to get the mix right. I agree with you. that a company cannot do everything in-house. It's impossible. It has to really, I mean, also in Nokia, we completely opened up, where we became based on open innovation. We were very active building innovative ecosystem around the company. I think that's very important for all companies to do. We also have an investment arm, that's venture capital arm we have also. And perhaps 2 case studies on that. One thing that we have done is that we have looked into our innovation, our intellectual property rights, all the patented innovations that we had, and we have identified a number of them that we did not pursue, that we just used as defensive patents. We didn't license, we didn't get any license revenue from them. And what we have done is we have incentivized small and medium-sized companies to use those innovations. So they received a free license with the result that many small and medium-sized companies were starting a business or driving a business all around our own business. So this was a very successful case that we did. Another one was that we, together with a Finnish university and a handful of other companies, launched a project called Demola, where any of the participating companies could approach the university with a specific business challenge. It could be in any kind of domain, and the university would then set up a team of multidisciplinary students, often coming from engineering, software developing, marketing, design also, and they would provide a solution to the problem. And in remarkably more than 90% of the cases, the company was so happy with the solution that they bought it from the students, meaning that the company secured itself another untapped possibility to get outside innovation into the company. And at the same time, these students got really injected into their DNA from a very early stage, the entrepreneurial mindset or spirit, if you want. So I think a case that has worked also extremely well. It has then spread across Finland. Many more universities became interested and adopted the concept. It went into Sweden, into Germany, into Hungary, into the Baltic states. And it was kind of funny because I arrived here already on Saturday and participated in some workshops, also with the innovation minister of Jalisco, and mentioned that case. And then one of his team said, yes, Leo, we are just in discussion with them, and we're about to also adopt that model. So Jalisco will be the first state, or Mexico the first country, where this is being deployed outside of the EU.
Great. So I know, Gustavo, you have an example about that, but I did promise the audience we do questions and answers. So if there's a microphone around that will come to you, I do see a hand up over here. So you can address the question in English or Spanish to any of us. And please state your name and what company or organization you represent.
My name is Francisco Medina. I'm in Infotech in Aguascalientes. It's a research center that belongs to the National Council of Science and Technology, but most people here know me because I'm one of the persons responsible for the success of Guadalajara in terms of the ecosystem. I think now what I just heard from the last gentleman from Mexico, I think it's ludicrous. We probably live in 2 different countries. Of course, there's a role for the government. I mean, this ecosystem would not exist if it wasn't for the leadership of the local government. Why? Because we have a pathetic banking system. There is no such thing as BC in Mexico, no matter what he says, and there's not even age of capital. And no, the numbers are there. There's no large Mexican company which has sprung up from a startup in this country, and none has been bought by a large US corporation. So, I mean, we live in 2 different countries, and obviously there is a role for government, and I think that was the big difference, at least in Jalisco. And there are lots of people here that would agree with me. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great comment. Do any of you have a response? And while they're responding, is there another question?
Can we respond?
So lift up your hand and the microphone will come to you. respond?
Just to clarify, there is a VC industry in Mexico. We have invested in over 50 companies. Our partners, I mean, there are at least other 5 or 6 venture funds that have invested in over 20 in the last couple years. There are at least other 10 or 15 that have invested in over 5 during the last year. So there is a nascent venture capital industry that didn't exist 3 years ago. There are also big companies that have been started from scratch. Hoteles City, Volaris, Interjet, Softec, Price Travel, Kio Networks, you name it. There are a lot of big companies that have been successful, and if we cannot see them, it's our fault, not their fault. And there is plenty of opportunity. So if we only look at the past, it's a very, very dark world we live in. I mean, not only Mexico, but the world itself. If we look at the future, it is actually very bright. So, I mean, it's probably a personal decision in which country do we live in.
Right. Entrepreneurial optimism, that's great. Appreciate that, thank you. Another question, I think I see over here, yeah?
In your opinion, what is the
Can
best...
you state your name and organization you represent?
My name is Rodrigo Mora. In your opinion, what is the best advice you can give for entrepreneurs?
I'm going to turn that over either to Mac or to Gustavo.
Well, it depends on what you're looking for. If you are already building something and you have already a team and a product, you should perhaps start looking for advice, maybe some mentoring, maybe some like building some skills for yourself and for your team. If you're lacking something, you have to start coming to meetups, networks, and networking events where you can enlarge your personal network or your company's network. You have to always be pitching. You have to always be speaking about what you're building in order to get feedback. If you already have something that is starting to sell, you have clients, you have a customer base, then perhaps it is a good point, a good moment to search for, to identify whether you need to keep bootstrapping or find some investment to boost your company's growth. So if you are more as an entrepreneur that has an idea that doesn't have something built up so far, perhaps coming to a startup weekend event, going to a lean startup machine event, or something that may at least shift the way you work and you think about entrepreneurship, that is a very good starting point.
And Mac, do you have a thought? Before you answer, is there going to be another question? That will be the last question. So think about your question and we'll come back to you after Mac's response.
Yeah, I would like to respond to, and
yeah.
This is easy. For me, start as early as possible. Like, we're used to waiting a lot before starting anything, and fail as fast as possible. And I'm not meaning fail blatantly, but fail as much as possible with whatever you're doing, so you learn. And finally, learn. Those are the 3 things I will recommend to anyone, entrepreneur or not. Start early, fail fast, learn and move on. Start something else.
Start as early as possible. Another question. Over here, okay.
You hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Angel Bañuelos. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I just want to make a quick comment. It's about the metrics that we're using here in Mexico. We used to hear about employments, exportations, and also how many engineers we're graduating. I think we need to add another metric, is how many entrepreneurs we're generating and how many startups we're generating. I think we have to focus on that part too.
So that goes back a little bit to public policy and perception. What do we incentivize? I think that's a great point to end on. As we're running out of time, I just want to give 1 minute to each of our panelists to tell us anything they wish they had more time to tell us about or innovation, and start with Leo.
Bueno, estoy muy contento de estar aquí. Deseo todo el mejor para el futuro de México y sobre todo Jalisco, con su gente simpática, su hospitalidad y su potencial creativo, y muchas gracias.
Matt?
Okay, thank you for coming. Get involved. If you're a policymaker, an entrepreneur, a company, get involved. Like, there's an ecosystem growing. To Angel's point, yes, we can measure and see it. I will be posting on my Twitter feed how we saw companies, startup companies doing innovation in Jalisco 2 years ago, 3 companies. 2014, we can see around 40, 50 companies, 50 startups working with investment, with employees, generating innovation. So it's measurable, it's happening, and get involved. Just
Thank you, Matt.
get something.
Gustavo?
I will follow up with Mac. Get involved. There are several things happening out there in each local community, in each city, in Mexico, in Latin America, in the world. Go and see it for yourselves. Be part of it. Be part of the change. I invite every single one of you to go and see what we're doing. Come talk to us. Go talk to entrepreneurs that you meet. If you see an entrepreneur, listen to him. Give him advice. If you are an entrepreneur, ask for advice. Search for answers yourself. Listen to your customers. They are the ones that want your product and that will tell you what they want. So if we don't want to see what's going on, as César said, it's our own problem to be isolated. Think about it. It will resonate in your heart. So get involved, go out there and join us. Join the movement, because it is happening. It is not only happening in Mexico, it's happening everywhere. So go to your countries, go to your cities, and look for it, search for it. Use UpGlobal as a resource, as a tool to actually get connected. So we are there, we will support you, and please be part of it.
Great. Thank you, Gustavo.
I'm going to keep going with my list. Best Day, Intellisys, National Soft, 3D Robotics, Simian, Lennox. There are plenty of companies that have been started by people that didn't have nothing in the start, found the resources to do it, and are leading in their markets. So if you want to join the club, please welcome. There are plenty of resources for you, and it's just a start. Let's keep building.
Great, thank you, César. And so with that, you can find us all on the internet, contact us, 500 Startups, up.co, Hackers and Founders, Nokia, and of course, the MIT Enterprise Forum Mexico. I think we are communities that support entrepreneurs across the globe, and we're happy to hear from you, both large and small, and new and aspiring entrepreneurs. So thank you for your time, and with that,
thank you.
And of course, if I didn't thank WCIT and WCIT, this has been a great conference, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yep.
Okay.
Gracias.
Thank you. You know, as this panel goes and changes their mics, I guess the next panel is waiting there. So thank you very much, all of you, for a very interactive session.